All right. Jim, cheers, brother.
Cheers, man.
Great seeing you.
Thank you. Likewise. And thank you so much for coming and visiting us here in the horrible Cayman Islands.
Yeah. So for the Cayman Islands, I mean, I've made this drink before on this podcast, but it's one of my favorites. I've been trying to bring it back, the Between the Sheets, because I just think split bases are exciting, but we don't really make them anymore. Everybody gets focused on like the one base and doesn't really go back. Like it's not one of the classics that gets remixed much.
Yeah.
It's one of the ones that gets forgotten about, and yet it's, I mean, I also like it that the creator of the sidecar also created this as an adaptation of a sidecar.
That's it. Like you got this Harry McKellen era, like Harry Craddock, Harry McKellen era going on with, and like you say on split bases, like not very far after that, like just a little bit after that, they actually had, you got Don Beach, and he's like, oh, this rum, yeah, this cocktail's good, but this rum's super aromatic, and this rum's really, really, really like woody. And then this rum's got loads of top notes. If I blend those together in this proportion, this is going to make my Missionary's Downfall work really well, or my Zombie work really well. So he's kind of pushing it after the fact, but from a base of Vieux Carrés and Between the Sheets. Plus also, we were talking about this earlier, I love the idea that there's this thing like a fancy drink. Everyone's like, okay, so we're drinking a sour. You know what would make this better? Orange. And it's like, oh, well, we have that in a liqueur. Let's throw that in there. And I'm like, So this is a crusted, let's put some sugar on it. Let's make it fancy. Let's put it up. Let's put that crust rim into something. Let's create the sidecar and then the white lady. And then, hey, you know what would be really good? Let's develop this with a split base. I think that's probably two of my favorite cocktails at the moment that are experiencing resurgences are Vieux Carré and then, like you say, should be Between the Sheets.
Between the Sheets is much easier to say for anybody that has no French. But yeah, so Between the Sheets, for those that haven't heard me talk about it before, equal parts rum, cognac, orange curacao, and then a half part lemon with an orange twist.
Delicious. And I saw you rocked out the Cuban style rum there.
Eminente, yeah.
Yeah, eminently. That's great. I mean, like, wood. I think also there's a lot to be said for making daiquiris with, older spirits or aged spirits or different things. I really like the rum blend that we made for one of the cocktails here at the library was. Bear in mind that this is also trying to tell the story of Dr. Maya Angelou in a very specific period of her life. So, because that's what you do.
So only a little bit of rules to that.
Yeah. It was, it's like go to the table. Everyone's like, so this drink's delicious, and because it's like very deliberately black and white, and it has a cloud on top of it with a rainbow garnish because she said be a rainbow in someone else's cloud, and so there's all these touch points to like this era in her life. But for the rums, it's a heavy. It's like Smith and Cross, so you've got a heavy overproof. It's an agricole, and then it's Claren. And then when we made that base, we then infused it with like chicory coffee from Café du Monde, like that New Orleans jazz kind of thing. But before we did that, we tried the rum. We were like, this should be our Mai Tai rum. So that actually that's in a bottle on the back bar now. It says Mai Tai rum, but it also just goes in stuff. So people are like, hey, I'd like a mojito, but I'd like it a little bit differently. And you're like, hey, can I get a cosmopolitan, but a little bit different? He's just like, let's just throw some of that in there. It's like ketchup. Delicious. Yeah.
That's amazing. Yeah, the blending of different things. Sometimes we want the pure ingredient, but other times you come up with something like how many bars have created their own bitters by combining two different orange bitters, and they're like, this is our orange bitters, or this. I think Employees Only does that with Ango and Regan's.
Yeah. Actually, I remember I was working at the Lonsdale. This is like way back, but Charles Vex did it wasn't even called bar takeovers then. Like he literally just someone flew over. Brian Miller flew over to the UK and stayed at Charles's house and came and did a couple of shifts at Lonsdale. And Charles went over and did a couple of shifts at Death and Co. But when he did that, he came back and he was like, man, I love Reagan's, but it's, so much cardamom. So actually, those guys are like cutting it with Angostura. And then Hoppies. Do you remember Hoppies bitters? Yeah, that was still around. And so you could put a load of that in there. And so we had this weird recipe kind of thing. It was, I think that there's a problem in the bartending community that everyone who's spent ages making this perfectly balanced, so like, you put your Hennessy VSOP in this. No one's criticizing Hennessy VSOP by putting another spirit. It's not like, oh, well, this was deficient in this, so we had to add more of this. You're blending your thing fit for purpose. And I think that you really can make it greater than some of its parts for cocktails. By putting different bitters together. Like, they have different things. Everyone's always trying to recreate some long lost yesteryear spirit, right? When you actually taste those spirits, a lot of the time they weren't great.
Well, they didn't know what they were doing as much as what we know now. There's still a little bit of that mystery to what happens in the still. Like, does this dent on like 6 feet up the neck? What does that do? We say that it changes it, and it does, but we don't really understand how completely even now. So back then they had even less idea.
Well, and the ability to measure that. I mean, gas chromatography or using spectrochromatographs or anything that you can use now where we can be like, hey, this is made up of loads of these molecules and these molecules and these, and we have like all of these coming. If you put all of those together in those exact amounts and give it a shake, it does not make the thing that you're analyzing, because of the complex bonds that are in there, because of all the other things that are happening. We know this because like people have tried doing this. They've tried doing it with cocktails. They've tried doing it by ripping off other people's spirits. And at the end of the day, even if you try, I think you were saying about a distillery that recreated another distillery and it still didn't taste the same. There's so many variables in this that actually just do your own thing, create your own thing. I mean, yesteryear did not have the metrics, but you had your nose and your palate, and so you just created stuff. And then I don't think people worried so much about consistency as well then. I think if you had one bottle of whiskey and it was really good and it was like spicy and rye, and then you bought the same brand whiskey a year later and it was really good and it was spicy and rye, you'd kind of be okay, right? You wouldn't be sitting there being like, oh, it's changed. Look, the color's changed. Which is like everyone these days is like, the colors changed, the bottles changed, the recipes changed, the brands changed. It's like, so change is never good? What?
Yeah.
Like, how do we evolve?
And it's the same people that don't want caramel coloring that are going, oh, it's a different color. And they don't know what to think about that. And you're like, yeah, but we could make it consistent by adding 1 in 1,000 parts of something that you'd never taste. But no, don't do that.
We had it with Santa Teresa. So that's, this is a Venezuelan rum, right? So everyone knows the 1796, which I could talk for an hour about the reasons that Solera system's really real, and using heavy pot still rum and stuff that other people weren't doing. And it's all true. Like they're very transparent and stuff about that. And I got to go and hang out with them a lot for that. But I also saw like how for the Gran Reserva, which is, it's the number 1 selling rum in Venezuela, but it's also like number 3 in Spain, and like, just massive amounts of juice going in here. When they're like putting together the blend, it's, okay, well, we need to crack like 500 barrels and dump this into the tank of this age and this age and this age, and then we'll tweak it so it's exactly the same as it always is. But it always comes out a different color. And so, yeah, you can like take the spirit caramel, I blanked on what the E number is for that. But you can take that spirit caramel and put it in there, and everyone smells it. They're like, oh, this must change it. You're like, yeah, but like take a glass of water and put 1 drop of Angostura bitters in there, and then just the entire thing goes pink. But you're not drinking Angostura bitters. It's, years ago, and I won't say which brand, I got 3 bottles of a new SKU that they'd released. So, doing the liquor count down in the basement, and there were 3 bottles of this very well-known, brand new, this is going to be our new volume product, and all 3 of them were different colors. And I remember talking to bar managers and people at the time, and they were like, I know, man, I just don't trust it. Like, what are they doing with it? Why? And I was like, even then I knew they're just checking which one's going to be great. We just happened to get 3 different batches at the same time. So, yeah, trust is such a fun thing with brands, right? Or with spirits.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So we're in the Cayman Islands. Cayman. I think before getting here, I would have called it Cayman.
Yeah.
Even though it's an A-N. But
yeah.
It's like, I'm from Toronto and don't pronounce the second T.
Took me ages. Like, even when I first got here, they correct you, like, a lot of the time. Cayman. Yeah.
How did you get here? What is your route in this industry that saw you here today?
Oh, it's circuitous. Feel like that's a word. Yeah, it was a roundabout way. I did the usual thing. I don't want to say the usual thing, but we were talking about this the other day over dinner. That thing about what do you really do? Like the most insulting question for someone who's like made a career out of whether it's bar backing or whatever you are in the hospitality industry. Like, what do you really do? It's like, isn't this enough? But then you get into what were you going to be? What were you going to be when you grow up? And you find these people like master's degrees and PhDs in like, quantum physics, or like they're like specialist beauticians and stuff like this. And then they ended up behind a bar. I had no idea. So I was doing philosophy at university, spent way too much money and need to, but have more beer vouchers. So I ended up working in a pub, in an old man's pub, like Baptism of Fire in the north of the UK, a place called Lancaster. And like this was literally like, they'd be like, oh, show me that bottle over there. And I'd go up and do it, and I'd turn around, and all the guys' beers would have just raised a little bit because they were just leaning over, and like I didn't know any tricks. I was like super green. So yeah, that was interesting. And then worked in like all different types of hospitality roles. I was a busser, I was a commie waiter, I was KP, worked in hotels, worked in restaurants and stuff over about the next 7 years. I worked in insurance for a little while, but no one would believe what happened there, so we'll just bypass that. And then I ended up in a cocktail bar where, in Newcastle upon Tyne, called Popolo, and I walked in and I just needed a job. So I went in, I gave my CV, and obviously I've got, like, at the time I was like, I've got 7 years experience, like, I know this. And they're like, okay, we'll give you a trial. And I remember, it was like back in the days where we all wore black shirts. So I'm like wearing my black shirt, and this guy comes in, he's quite older, and he sits down and I was like, hey, good afternoon, sir, how can I help? Like, and he says, I'll take a G&T, please, but get Steve to make it for me. I'm like, dude, it's a G&T. I know it's like my first day, but I got this. And he's like, no, I'll have Steve make it. And then this guy, Steve, who's the bar manager, went and put down a napkin, put down a glass of water on it. It was sparkling water because he knew the guy's preferences. He knew everything. Then he took a glass that I wouldn't have used, like a long, like very slim highball. Took a gin that I'd never heard of because, this was kind of like the boonies at the time. Used lemon instead of lime. Used a wedge instead of a slice. Served it with a stirrer, bottle tonic, like just built it in a different way and put this down. I was like, man, this is a G&T. I've got so much to learn. And there were like 130 cocktails on the menu. So that was just an eye-opener to the fact that there was always something to learn. From there, I went up further north, so Lancaster to Newcastle to Edinburgh. Just found that people were like friendlier. And it's just really cool, like culture and like progressive, and like really interesting mixes of people there. So I was lucky enough to work in Edinburgh around the time that loads of cool people were rocking out, like Rick's and Tonic and Bramble and places like that. And it was a real melting hub. And then I felt the inevitable pull of money. Of more cocktail bars. So I moved to London. And then, so I was working in a whiskey bar in London, then a cocktail bar in London, so Albernac and then Lonsdale. And then a guy called John Gakuru, who everyone knows John, was like, hey, Jim, you're running a very successful cocktail bar. Have you ever thought about going into brand ambassador side? I was like, I don't know, man. It kind of feels like sales. It kind of feels like selling out. And he was like, well, they're looking for someone for Herradura. And I was like, I love Herradura. Yeah, they're great. Okay, let's look at that. So I got a job working for Santa Teresa, and became like. So then I was UK, Europe, then global, and then I was like in the States, and then I fell in love with New York, and just ended up there a lot more, and got to travel and just meet loads of people at different stages of their careers, but also different markets and like different eras and different like ways of thinking about food or like what a bar experience is. So it really opened my eyes to a lot of things. And then I opened a bar in California, then moved down back to London and was running a group when a buddy of mine, Mike Ryan, who so Mike I knew from the Angostura Global Cocktail Challenge. He was like the head judge there, and I was emceeing. And he did this seminar, everyone's supposed to be talking about their drinks and stuff. So he's like, yeah, I'm going to tell you about Kimpton and this and the bars. And he didn't say anything about drinks, not once. He spoke about like ergonomics of the bar. He spoke about making sure that the staff have enough water, meditation, like how to give people tools to be able to like stretch in the mornings, like, you know, all of this stuff. I was like, so pretty much everything you're saying about how you've made successful bars in your hotel group is making sure that your staff are like well maintained and happy. And that really resonated. Also, Mike's just a really, you know, interesting bar guy, but like we then did Carnival together. So about 6 months later, he messages me and asks me if I know anyone who might fit a beverage manager role running one of the world's top luxury resorts in the Cayman Islands. I'll be honest, I had to look up the Cayman Islands. I knew the Cayman Islands because of tax evasion. And
the reason most people know the Cayman Islands.
and that's the thing. It's not actually tax evasion if you're following the laws of the countries that you're doing it. It's just unethical for large I mean, there's like a building here, all of this stuff. But I still know nothing about that. That's that's not you know, Your Honor. I know nothing about that in terms of like I learned that from the firm. You know, like Mitch McDear comes here and then they make it sound really dodgy. But then I looked it up and I was like, oh, wow, this is like it's 45 minutes to Jamaica. It's like 45 minutes to Cuba. It's an hour to Miami. It's 3 hours to New York. And as a European who's very lucky, well, I'm British, but I used to be European.
You weren't there to vote.
I know I was. I voted.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, well, there were 2 nights that my wife and I stayed up and kind of watched the votes come in. Both of them involved, in the end, like literally a bottle of whiskey between us while we were like just sat there. But yeah, Brexit was just didn't expect that to happen. Like, and it was really tight, sure, but you know, it was still like, okay, so the Vox Populi is that we should be isolationists and close borders and stuff, and like, yeah, not my jam. So so we left, and yeah, there was another vote sooner in this place called America. They had a vote about something. Can't remember. Yeah. But yeah, so we looked it up, and then like literally a month later, I was here, and then 6 months later, COVID hit. So my wife and I, well, my girlfriend at the time, my wife and I ended up stuck here during COVID. Just insanely lucky, I guess. Yeah, it was. It was tough here. It was tough. But like everyone did their own COVID, right? You know, like, and depending on how happy you are by yourself, or like what personal development you did, or what happened with your business or your family, or like where your distances were, or whatever. You know, I don't think it was easy psychologically on anyone. But we definitely got the luck of the draw. You know, we the island reopened, but just the locals. And yeah, that's it. That's been here ever since. You know, just opened a new cocktail bar within the property, and that kind of the scene here is really evolving. So no kind of plans to move anywhere soon. Yeah. How have you found it since you've been here?
I didn't know what to expect because as a Canadian, I didn't really come down to the islands much. Like, America's got Cancun, and then they have every other island as well. But they've got Cancun. It's super cheap for them. So when you're young, I describe it as when you're young and dumb and just want, like, all you can drink as a vacation, America has Cancun. Canada, because America can't go to Cuba, Canada has Cuba, especially East Coast Canada, because it's a really nice, easy shot down. And because the Americans can't go there, it is super cheap for Canadians.
Of course. Because
they want some tourism. So Canada kind of fuels that as the next largest wealthy first world country. So I've been to Cuba 4 times as a young, dumb person that just wanted to drink, and twice as a bartender when Havana Club sent me down. But other than that, I'd only been to Barbados on like a quick weekend jaunt with the wife, and I had heard the banking stuff, and when I was coming down, a friend was like, "Figure out the banking stuff," and I was like, "Okay, I think the internet could do that for you too." But
yeah,
but it's amazing. Like, the first thing I noticed was that water it's not just turquoise. It is like, it looks like spa water, like the colors that spas are trying to replicate. And I think it's something to do with the fact that it's not like a tan sand, it's a white sand. Mm-hmm. And then so the water doesn't get darker looking over tan sand. It's over white sand, so it looks like
If you look at what your sand's made
aqua.
out, if so, sand is, microscopic silicone and various different types of rocks and minerals and stuff like that. Sure. Here it's not. Here it's just coral.
It's dead
like,
coral.
Yeah, you go into it and you see these tiny, tiny little shells and coral everywhere, and that's like massive filtration, and also just like it's really beautiful drainage and stuff. So yeah.
And so then after that, exploring all the bars and everything, like the cocktail scene here, I'd heard some stuff about it that it had massively improved in a pretty quick time frame in the last 10 years. And it's true. There's amazing stuff down here. I mean, I think you have the challenge that everything has to be pretty much imported. But other than that, the talent here is amazing. And I think there's, I've said this before, that there's all it takes to get a good scene started is two things. Somebody with the motivation, drive to do it, and somebody else to tell them yes. Because you need an owner or a GM or somebody to say yes. Because the GM can't do it if the bartenders aren't enthused about it. So if the bartender wants to do it, you just need somebody above them that controls the purse strings to say yes.
Yeah.
And if they say yes, that's the start. And then you start seeing, because it is more investment. Like, you could open a bar just selling, Guinness and rum and Cokes.
But it's that time investment, right? Like because you got to believe, right? You've opened places, so have I, and then you don't know what it's going to be, so you can gamble, you can take all of the data, you can like whatever you want, but you don't know exactly who's coming through that door, what they're going to drink, what they're going to spend, how your pricing is, how they'll react to stuff. So you need some time. And so many times, we're talking on a market level here, but it's the same for a bar. And I think for a lot of these markets, someone goes back from, let's say London. Someone goes back from London, they're like, oh man, there's like, bar with shapes for a name. I'm going to open an art movement bar. I'm going to have like a rotovap, and I'm just going to pour my drinks, and I'm going to do this. So they go back to, the middle of nowhere where there's like a town of 100,000 people or whatever, and they're going to be the only cocktail bar. And that's a great amount. Like you then have the keys to the kingdom to be, because people see stuff on the internet all the time. There's like, everyone knows what a mojito is. People are drinking Negronis, like brand calling Negronis at 18 years old. That's like a completely different world to what I grew up in. But you go back to it, and then you just go too fast, and everyone walks in and they're like, hey, can I get a Negroni? You're like, we're not doing Negronis. Like, here, eat this jelly cube. They're like, okay, no, I don't want this. So I feel like, it must be interesting coming into this market where it's not big as well. Well,
I think at the end of the day, you do have to, I opened my bar, it's gone now, but I opened my bar, and we used to say of that the barrier to restriction now is gone. We don't have a GM telling me what to do as the former bar manager, things like that. Yeah. We're the bartenders are the owners now. The only people that can tell us what to do now is the customer and the bank. And if the customer keeps saying yes, then the bank will keep saying yes. But you have to have the wherewithal to understand, what are you going to be? Because you don't necessarily, you could have the rotovap, you could have all the crazy stuff, but at the end of the day, if somebody wants a gin and tonic and you're not doing it, really nice in the highball with the bottled tonic beside it and everything, maybe you've missed the mark if that's what people want.
Or if your drinks take 25 minutes. I mean, this is something I've seen again and again and again. Naming no names, obviously, but you go into places and you sit down. And I've done it where I've walked into a place where I've known the bartender and sat down. I'm like, hey, how you doing? They're like, oh, you Jim? Yeah, great to see you. I'll be right with you. And so they give you a cocktail menu, you look at it, and you're like, bang, I'm going to have this drink. And then it's 5-10 minutes before someone comes over and takes your order, and then it's 5-10 minutes before you get the drink. And it's frustrating for us. We're hospo to see that. But for a guest, they don't even have the ability to really analyze what's happening in the space or just get caught up in something. And I feel like that's something where have the bells and whistles, but number one is you always say what hospitality is. It's I'm really thirsty. I need a glass of water. I don't need a story about your rotovap pre-distilled, Jello cube Negroni or whatever it is. I need, just some water, and then we can go from there and do that. And like you say, it's an interesting world moving to hotels. I'm not from a hotel background. I'm from like independent cocktail bars. And even when I was working with brands and I was going into hotels, I really kind of didn't empathize. I could kind of see, but I didn't know what it was like for like purchasing and procurement, and then like group level like decision making, like stratas, and all of these different things that were going on in there. And so when I came into it, there's everyone sees it as like, oh yeah, but you're never going to have to worry about paying for the 30 grand's worth of booze. So you open your bar, you pay for your back bar. That holding stock, sure, it goes onto a bottom line, but you got to pay the people for it. So that's an investment that's just sitting there, and if there's a loan or something like that involved, it's like ticking away. So whereas when we opened this place, and I was like, I need a cognac cocktail. I need a pre-filter of cognac. It's going to be like $6,000. They're like, okay, because it's a large luxury resort, and you can do that. So I think that there's those nuances. I mean, it's a big thing to say, nuance. We're talking about like an independent bar or whatever. We're bringing it back to the Cayman Islands. I think when I got here, the infrastructure was already here. Like, so Simon Compson, who's got door number 4, he had originally been like a bartender, then he was the world-class brand ambassador, and he worked at the Ritz-Carlton. He'd done this stuff, but came from the UK, had traveled the world, and was just building education. He's like, we should be doing fresh squeezed juices, and we should be doing education. Back room, when it opened, they were like, we should be doing like fresh squeezed juices and decent ice, and we'll do like a speakeasy style program. This was years ago. Amber Lamb, who works for Jake Scott here, she was like, yeah, we're gonna do a Cayman Cocktail Week, and we're gonna develop our client. We'll develop the consumer. We'll educate them. We'll give them platform. We'll do tastings. We'll do like interactive cocktail things, cinema nights, whatever. And then that, along with the living in paradise, working in a cocktail bar, that sort of thing, really just created this great like petri dish of development and evolution, where I think a lot of other islands, because of the access to stuff. Like when I first got here, we ran out of Aperol, and I was like, okay, when will it be back in stock? And they were like, maybe 6 months. And you're like, okay. Right, do I make Aperol? Are we just on Campari spritzes now? What happens? Yeah.
Does that create a new problem where when it comes back in, you then overload on it to try to make sure you have it, and then everybody else misses out? Or because I've had that coming from Ontario, government controlled alcohol, the LCBO would do that with some new stuff. Like I remember when Luxardo Maraschino came out, and they just brought it out as a vintage, which means they're only going to bring it in twice a year maximum. But a little speakeasy bar bought all of it because they wanted it for all these classic cocktails. And then no one else had it. But to the LCBO, they then went, oh, nobody wants this. One bar bought all of it. Yeah, none of us could get it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That very much happens here. It happens in 2 ways. Like one is, and I'm standing on the side of the big evil villain here because we're talking about the independent cocktail bar. I mean, it's almost like, oh, well, maybe they'll run out of Aperol again. Well, we probably have space, and then we have budget to be able to buy a lot of Aperol. And then if it does run out, then we will have Aperol long after the time that other places where they don't have the physical space, or they don't have the budget, or it's just stupid to buy 20 cases of Aperol. I've got a couple of products that I not panic bought. I was advised that this was going to run out during COVID. It ran out, but I made a dumb decision because it could have run out as much as it wanted. If you only get through a bottle a month of it, then buying 5 cases of it means you end up with 5 cases. And, I had to turn around and justify that to an F&B director or whatever. But it didn't, the stuff's there. We'll get through it, So that's kind of one way. And the other side is getting a brand to stick. So the guy who had been doing the job before me, John Stanton, who'd come out of Sable in Chicago, and he got here and he was like, no one's doing fresh squeezed juices. He was like, well, we're opening in this new luxury resort. All of our bars are going to do fresh squeezed juices. And they're like, it's the Caribbean. No one expects that here. I was like, yeah, but it's just the way you do it. I'm not going to make a margarita with sour specs. I'm not going to do a pina colada with So he kind of brought this in. And as other places opened, they did this. But then he was going to suppliers and he's like, hey, so you don't have chartreuse on the island? And they're like, yeah, well, we brought in a case like once in 1996 and it didn't sell. So we're never going to bring it again because it doesn't sell. And he's like, okay, I'll buy it. But also these guys are going to buy it and these guys are going to buy it. And now we actually, kind of get together like the bar operations guys and the bar managers and the bartenders, and if there's a product and we want it, and go and say like we will buy, take the punt on the new product. Back then we're talking about maraschino and chartreuse. Now it's a little bit more like get us Claren and we'll rinse through it. I'm trying to remember what other like Suze. No one wants to bring in Suze. All of the bartenders want Suze. And it is a weird one, like to have that, but now it's gotten that niche. You know what I mean? So, whereas when I was in London or when I was in New York, I could literally just walk down the street if my bar ran out of one of these products and buy this product off the shelf. You can't do that here. So, it is a constraint. It does come with different things that are on there. Like I say, I'm definitely on the lucky side of it where we can build a demand. But it's all about communication. I feel like everywhere, I was saying like Newcastle and Edinburgh and London, these were all communities and people would come back with like a new product that they tried in like San Francisco or whatever. And they'd come back like, man, you got to get this like Tempest Fugit. Like, this is legit, and then everyone would try it. And so everyone would be like, hey, what if we get this? And then suppliers and brands or distributors would bring it in, knowing that they were going to do some door on it. And it meant that there's like a communication all the way through it. And that happens here very easily, like door number 4, next door, back room, all the bars at the Ritz-Carlton. There's a bunch of others. It's the island is very small to have this number of bars, but we also will communicate as well. So
that's amazing. Now, let's go back. You talked about coming from independence and then working in a hotel. What was that transition like? What was the kind of like learning curve there like? What have been the kind of pros and maybe some cons of that?
I want to throw it out there that Kimpton, Kimpton's part of IHG since 2015, but Kimpton was started from this guy, Bill Kimpton, in 1982. And I think like you and I would have enjoyed having a drink with Bill. Like you see it like 5 o'clock every day. There's like social hour. There's like wine hour. That's in every Kimpton. And it's just because he was having a manager meeting one time. And so he used to do the manager meeting, then pour everyone a glass of wine. And a guest was like, hey, do you mind if I have a glass of wine? He's like, yeah, of course. He gave him a glass of wine. Then they got talking. He's like, hey, this is such an amazing way to interact with people. And so 2 managers or however many in each place pour out wine and chat to guests in every Kimpton in the world from 5 to 6 p.m. And that ethos was kind of like the thing that where I was like, well, if I'm going to make that switch, I had that that insight through, like I said, Mike had done this seminar at the Angostura Global Cocktail Challenge, and then I knew I was like, these guys think different, and then also they're like in Forbes top 10 companies to work for in the world. So this isn't a Kimpton advertising program. I drank the Kool-Aid, it's fine. But coming from an independent, I needed it to be that. Even having seen it, I remember Chris Moore, when he was doing Beaufort Bar at the Savoy, wanted to get in one of the Santa Teresa products, and he was like, sure, man, I'm going to get it in. And it was like 3 months. He was like, I really want to do this cocktail. I've got this thing. I'm going to put it on the new menu. But to get that product in was like 3 months because he had to do it, had to come in through their supplier. Their supplier didn't list that product at that point in time. So it was just all of these hoops. And I remember thinking, I was like, wow, like everywhere I've ever worked, as a bartender, you have to state a case. You have to, and then the bar manager or the owner, there's levels, But as a bar manager, one of the bartenders would come to me and I'd be like, okay, well, bring me the product. Let us try it together. Let's listen to what they have to say about it. So, yeah, long story long, I had done lots of different like openings in different styles of places around the world. And then coming to a completely new place with a completely new set of challenges meant that everything was just weird to me. So because everything was weird to me, there wasn't, there's stuff, back in the day, in a couple of the bars that I've worked in, you might be allowed to have a sip of beer every now and then, or, trailer happiness, a bottle of rum. And, that doesn't happen in hotels. Like, no one drinks. You drink, we're sitting here sipping this. I'm like super conscious of the fact that we're sat in my hotel, and I won't tell you what time it is. 11:20, and we're having a drink. So there's kind of a paradigm shift in mentality, but actually the infrastructure was good enough, and then the support network of like the F&B manager, the F&B director, and then the other people who work here, they've all worked in this world, and they know that it can be weird for people. So it was really like caring, welcoming, and structured, and then also from my point of view, I've been able to build systems that I have seen in other places and put those in, which I wouldn't necessarily have been able to do in an independent. So rather than moving into a constrictive environment, it's like, no, we do it this way or whatever. And there's definitely some aspects of that. I've moved into an environment where it's like, okay, cool. Well, you're delivering the baseline numbers that we need on all of the metrics, and the staff seem happy. So yes, you can, develop this project or redesign the way that our inventory system works, or whatever it is, our training programs or whatever it is. There's a lot of leeway in that. Like I say, it was interesting. I was like 40 when I moved here, so that would have been like 22 years in the hospital, like 22 years behind bars, as we say. And yeah, it was definitely a learning curve. But in most ways a positive one.
That's amazing. Yeah.
Because you did hotels as well, right?
No. I worked clubs, I worked pubs, I worked rock bars, I worked fine dining, and everything sort of in between, but never got to the hotels. And I think my thing about hotels was I did work at a golf club very early on, and that sort of felt like a hotel to me. Like, it was just everything was slow. Like, there was no urgency in almost anything, unless you were putting out tables for like some big wedding or some event that was happening, but there was no urgency to anyone. And I thought that was hotels to me. It was like, hotels are just more prepared for everything, so they're never, because they don't go outside of certain lines.
Yeah.
Whereas the other bars go outside of the lines, but therefore they're never fully prepared. It's like they're prepared for organized chaos. Hotels don't want chaos.
That's like the probably the best like sum up of it is, a cocktail bar can be organized, because even if you're like a slick independent and you have like a really good reso system and whatever, and you've got great door people and you build lines outside, stuff will just like, you just might end up with the 40 guests that order the stuff that you don't normally do, or you got a Ramos on the menu because you're cool and you're like, hey, we can do a Ramos, and then just that one time someone orders 40 Ramoses, that sort of thing. That really never happens in the hotels that I'm used to. But you ever read Cosmopolitan by Toby Cicchini?
No.
So this is like, it's called Cosmopolitan: A Bartender's Life. And what I would do as like a training thing, and this is why, but there's some very good books out now that I think you can direct bartenders to, and obviously there's the internet, which for better or worse has all the information in it, maybe without guidance, but it was always like Joy of Mixology, that's like a really good book to read. And then if someone had done like the nightclubs, the bars, the pubs, all of those, the rock bars and all of those things that you mentioned, then I'd be like, hey, you should read this. And it's this, it's the guy who had Passerby in Chelsea in New York, and now he has Long Island Bar. Nominally, one of the people on the way to the Cosmopolitan being in everyone's glasses, and definitely a big part of that. So, but he takes it from, it's like this, I'm opening a bar. So it's literally him arriving in the meatpacking district and like opening his like shutters and like walking, describing like, the dump trucks like taking away the food from the night before from the market or whatever as he opens the shutter and he starts prepping the bar, and then it jumps back to he's a kid and he's watching his dad make fresh lemonade. And so like kind of getting an idea of the fact that there's this perfect ratio and ritual of like drinks creation. And so he follows through his career, but there's this great bit in it, and I can't remember, I think it's like the St. Regis, the King Cole Room or something like that in New York. But there was in the late 80s and early 90s when this was set, and 100%, and it kept like, maybe we think that we pass it, but there is this thing about walking into a 5-star luxury hotel, and maybe there should be, but I'm going to walk into the American bar. I'm going to walk into the Connaught bar. I'm going to walk into, Scarfs at the Rosewood, UK Central, any Nomad, like all of these amazing bars. The Algonquin. I'm going to walk into these places, and there's like this idea that you need to be something, whether it's a bank account or the way that you're dressed or like schooled in a certain way or part of a club, like maybe it was a secret pin or whatever. Anyway, one time he's just in a place that he doesn't, I think he's uptown, and he goes into this hotel and he sees this door is like open and he sees that there's this ornate bar behind it. So he goes and has a look, and it's just beautifully opulent with these amazing like frescoes on the wall and all of this. And the very well dressed, kind of waiter comes over and is like, grab a seat, sir. I'll be right with you. And he's like, oh no. And then he second guessed him. He's like, okay, well, I mean, you just told me to grab a seat. So whatever the code word is, I'm ready. He's like, let's see how far this goes. So he sits down, and he has a book with him or whatever, and the guy comes over, gives him a menu, looks at him, and he's like, I'll just take a gin and tonic. And the guy brings him over the gin and tonic, glass of water. It's a great gin and tonic. The music's great. He looks around. There's loads of history in the place, and he's like, cool. And he pays, and he's like, and then here's the funny thing, because you also think that it's a financial thing. He's like, I can't remember, he was like working in an Indian restaurant or something at the time. His place, the gin and tonic would have been more expensive than it would have been in this luxury hotel secret bar that we can't go into. And it just broke it for him. He was like, why do we believe that there's this barrier that I can't go through? One of the things we do here is I have people come in and they're like, so you have like a really expensive vintage cocktail at the library. I'm like, yeah, we do. We also do coffee and beer, and you can have a glass of water, and you can sit over there and read your book, and you can wear flip-flops. Anyone is welcome. It's in a hotel, and that's actually what it means. So yeah, that's been like kind of the big paradigm shift in my mind, and I think that Toby Cicchini kind of nailed that, breaking through that elitism.
Yeah, that's interesting because it's like, so working with Hennessy, we have a lot about like luxury. We're the world's largest luxury spirit brand. We're the world's largest luxury company when you include Louis Vuitton to that mix. But a lot of people think luxury is a price tag. We talk a lot about it being, it's a feeling. To some people, luxury is an extra day off to like spend time with their family. For me, it's like one of my biggest luxuries is taking my dog out in the morning, because I get to see the happiness on his face as he rolls around or chases squirrels or something like that. And that just starts my day right. That's like a little luxury for me. And I think when you can provide that to a lot of people, the guy in the flip-flops, drinking a beer, reading a book, the lady ordering the $700 1930s Bacardi rum daiquiri. Yeah, they're two different things, but they're different things to different people for reasons.
Yeah, I mean, I think you've just nailed it. Like, time is a luxury. It's just, I'm definitely going to use that again. But yeah, that the thing that I can't buy, because of the constraints and stuff, is time. And how do I spend that time? And people are like, I quite often go to bars and I take a book and I sit and read a book, but in a busy bar, like I'm super happy. Like, it's 27 years in hospitality. It's white noise to me. I find it eerie when it's completely silent, so I can quite happily read a book and focus and delve into the world that I'm in. But having that moment to be able to do that, I thankfully I'm at different times in my life, I probably haven't been able to afford the drink or to be able to go and do that. But now I have both the money and the time to be able to do that. What do I want to do with it? I don't need to go and, I don't know what like buy a supercar or go, go to the opera or whatever these things that are there. Although, going to the opera is interesting, but actually, for my choice, reading a book in like a pleasant environment with a drink, whatever it is, could be a cold beer, could be, between the sheets. That's really the luxury. There's an interesting stat that I had in my pocket for ages, and it was something about the average salary of the people who buy what is classified as fine, so like luxury goods, and something like 70% of all of the luxury goods that are bought, like the fine goods, including restaurants and wines and stuff like that, were being bought by people who, at the time, were earning less than $75,000 a year, or would be like $100,000 now. $100,000 a year is a lot of money to everyone, but $100,000 a year does not get you, a Lamborghini and drinking $700 cocktails every night. You can rent in a nice place, but you can't, have a giant multi-million-dollar mansion. And it was because of knowledge. Like when they dialed into it, it was just all of these people kind of, so they're not buying the most expensive something, they're just buying like the best or the best thing for them. So, like you can go out there and buy a magnum of, another champagne, no brands, and spray it over the people next to you. Or you can go get a Bill Carson Rosé or a Krug or something and sit and enjoy it. But it's special. You're buying the special, and you're spending a higher than average proportion of your money to buy that luxury, right? As opposed to just it being a drop in the ocean. And so obviously I'm going to buy the most expensive car, sneakers, wine, whatever it is. And I thought that was really interesting because I see it all the time. People are like, they come here and then they read about the Hemingway daiquiri. It's only $350, by the way. But they read about this and then they're like, oh, and we're like, we'll just make you a normal Hemingway, and then they have a normal Hemingway. Then maybe they have a little special. They're going to have like a vintage Negroni, but just with the Campari is going to be vintage. So that's going to jump it up. It's, that's like $40, $50 for a cocktail. No one's sniffing at that. But they're here, they're on holiday. And then the last day is like their 50th wedding anniversary or their birthday or whatever. And they're like, we should push out the boat, and we do that. And it's our job to make sure that experience is valued in that, not in everyone can have it, but this is a memory that cannot be bought by everyone, that you take away, that is in some way priceless. And I feel like that's what luxury is always really trying to do, is they, hand-me-down watches or, wines that are of a moment of a vintage or whatever that is, or the craftsmanship or the time or whatever it is goes into this to create a unique experience for you at that point. Yeah.
I read something the other day that said you can't create memories. Like you physically can't attempt to create a memory. You don't know what's going to be memorable to you until after it's happened.
That's so good.
And then you think back later on it. Yeah, it's good.
It's also really interesting when you think about everyone who's just, it was Snapchat, now it's TikTok, now it's Instagram. I'm just going to sound a little bit old for a while. I use social media, but I try not to be used by it. But I remember, like, even when digital cameras were coming out and we were taking the first equivalents of selfies and stuff like that, people are like, oh, la, la, la. And then they'd do something and they'd be like, oh, that was really good. Do that again. Like, do it again? No, because then you're creating, and then there's a photo of your face not looking like it did when you walked around a corner and saw the thing, and like, I get it, we stage it. It's really good for triggering, it's as an external memory drive to be able to stimulate those things, but a lot of the time people are faking it, and especially if it's the Instagram thing where they've seen something and they're like, oh, we have to do the photo like that woman did where she jumped in the cenote in Mexico. Okay, film me, I'm going to do this. Let me have a look at it. And you're like, but also you should just go and jump in there with no one filming and enjoy it, right?
Now's a good time for another cocktail.
Oh, that's a great idea. Let's. I feel like my cocktail's been in your way. What are you in the mood for, man? What's like? Long and refreshing.
I'm in Cayman. Make me something Cayman.
All right, we got this.
That's great. It's got that kick right up front of the big, like, molassesy rum.
I didn't.
And
Yeah,
then
yeah.
and then it goes like real bright right afterwards.
Yeah, I didn't add that much of. I think the Clarins really dragging the overproof out through the top. But yes, right. I like the champagne bit. I forgot to put the mint in, but I'm kind of okay with that. So
I thought maybe the one clear thing you grabbed was mint.
Yeah.
Was the mint syrup, but yeah.
Yeah, no,
Still works.
It's actually, and it's a full-on mint distillate that the guys put together. It's like that whole thing of like, I remember when I first got here and talking about developing markets, right? I went into the bar at Ave, and one of the bartenders was like, oh, so you're the new beverage manager, and you're like, you've worked it all over the world and stuff. So like, when are we getting a Rotavap? And I was like, what? And they're like, when are we getting a Rotavap? You're like, you know, some cocktail guy from across the pond, you know. I was like, I mean,
it's in your luggage, right?
I was like, well, what are you going to use it for? And they're like, what do you mean? I was like, well, I mean, why do you need one? Like, I'd never run a bar with a Rotavap before. Pretty lucky to have worked with them. And there's like Crucible in London where we've done some stuff for development for different brands. And yeah, but I was like, so what are you doing here that means that you need a Rotavap? Because when you can answer that question for me, then maybe we can have a conversation about it. But at the moment, you just think that there's a shiny toy that's in there. Anyway, when we opened this place, we needed the ability to create anything that we could think of. And that's where the tool came into it. But that's where sort of Benji, who'd been at Little Mercies, and Frankie and Francesco, who'd been at Paradiso, their ability to understand how to extract flavors at any level gave us, there's a mint distillate back there, there's a lime distillate, there's like... There's, again, matcha tea distillate that goes into a couple of things. And these are things where they're like not just playing with stuff, they can kind of visualize it a lot. And I feel like that's really helpful for the bartenders and the rest of the bartenders to be able to like pick up something and go, I have this idea I want to put mint into my drink. If I put fresh mint into this drink particularly, I'm going to get bits. Or whatever reason there is for not putting fresh mint into that drink. Or you just want a consistent essence of mint every time, then that's a good reason to have it on the bar. And it's relatively cost effective as well. I mean, like they've
come way down in price.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the setup cost for it is insane. For, like I say, for an independent bar, you could probably fill your back bar for less than adding a Rotavap to start off with at least. But once you've got it, buying fresh mint all the time or throwing away off mint as opposed to turning it into something that you can use all the time is definitely. So you mentioned about like kind of challenges of being on the island. One of the biggest challenges that we have is it's an island. Everything is shipped here. There is door number 4 and next door both do very well as smaller independents at working with local farmers and buying as much local as possible. And we do the same. But we're like 260 room hotel. It's a very high volume thing. So we could buy the island out of mangoes, and put them into our kids' mango smoothies in like a week. And so then it means that everything's getting shipped in, and that's as someone who's come from like being part of that conversation quite early on of carbon footprint impacts and really understanding the impacts, not just like, okay, well, we're going to take something, we're going to throw in the bin and we're going to use it another time and then we throw it in the bin. Like, okay, great, but did you need to do that? Like, does it help anyone? Are you actually reducing the physical amount of waste that's coming out of your property? So being part of that, then finding out that everything that I bring here has a carbon footprint like higher than gin, which is, I love gin, but it's like when everyone's like, we've got a carbon zero gin, you're like, how many botanicals are you putting in there that have come, where have they come from? So that's with everything here. So finding stuff where we can maximize work seasonal out of season, but retain quality and control of ingredients and consistency, not have to put prices up, not be buying cherries in November or whatever. It's like there's a lot of those challenges that things like Rotavaps and then being able to understand ferments, preserves. I think it's one of the reasons why milk punches are really popular at the moment as well. Yeah. Consistent, sustainable, sits on the shelf for ages, and if you make enough of it, it'll last you all through the off season. Yeah.
Yeah, no, genius. I've I mean, we've got a cocktail competition at Hennessy that asks for sustainable elements to your drink. And one of the things that struck me was that word means something different to everywhere you are in the world. And that's super interesting because when I look at like the Canadian bartenders, not a lot of them thought about ice wastage, water wastage, anything like that, because no one's ever worried about that in Canada for the most part. You're like, yeah, don't leave the sink on while you're brushing your teeth, things like that. But it's not, we don't have to save water by mandate like you might in California or somewhere that's in a drought. Canada has most of the world's fresh water, so they don't worry about that. Whereas Canada worries a lot about citrus because all of that's imported. Whereas the Mexican bartenders in this competition, no one cared about citrus because they're like, yeah, it grows outside, like right now. So it's where you are really your sustainability. No two practices from one bar on the other side of the world and here are ever going to be the same. They have different considerations to make.
Yeah, I mean, if you're in the home of, XYZ, I mean, you can get everything in New York, right? Some of it is coming in, a private jet from Japan, and you're paying for that private jet for your whatever it is. But yeah, you can get anything in New York. And I remember Kevin Denton, when he was at the Gramercy Park Hotel rooftop, we went up to go and see him. And he was like, hey, do you want to see the garden? We're like, sure. I mean, we're on a rooftop. It was very green. There were a lot of like greens around. And it was like a charity event that was based around something. I think Simon Ford had brought us there. And so we're all just on a rooftop. And then he's like, let's go upstairs. Like, but we're on the rooftop, and so he takes us through up into the skylight. And when they're taken over the hotel, there were all of these old, like soup pots, like giant stock pots. Those ones of varying sizes and weights, and they were all going to be gotten rid of because when you're Danny Meyer and you're taking over a place, you don't work with 20-year-old someone else's stock pots. It's built into the budget, right? So they were going to get rid of them. And Kevin's like, can I have them? Yeah, sure. So he made the rooftop into a garden, and he built like a greenhouse out there. And then by, I think a year in, not the citrus, because you obviously, but pretty much everything else on the menu was going in there, from herbs and spices to strawberries and stuff like that. This is a busy bar in the center of New York with winters and stuff like that. And the guy managed to do it, and he did it in repurposing something else from it. And I think, sometimes it's a gimmick and sometimes it's a passion. And then a lot of the time now, Little Red Door are very good for this. Like Alex and the team's way of working with farmers, they are actually analyzing, like you say, water usage or whatever that is specific to what they're doing, and then adapting it. Well, do we have to use that? Do we have to go through this step because we're carbon neutral, but this uses a lot of energy, which we're pulling from a grid, which is based on, fossil fuels or whatever it is. I think those conversations are really interesting at the moment for people. I'm surprised that there aren't more, because they definitely exist for every company is the advisor or the auditor who comes in and looks at it and goes well, if you do this, then we're going to be able to drop this, and then that'll be really good. And a lot of people just pay these people to go in because it's it's the appearance of doing something that has to be done. Whereas if you actually go into it, there's some really simple stuff that you can do to remove stuff, right?
Yeah. What have you found as maybe an impactful practice that's been super easy to implement?
Eco spirits. That's straight away. I don't usually name a product or something for something, but eco spirits is when we went through the analysis, they were bringing, and it's the guys from it's the guys from Next Door Agro Group who set up to do the importation. So it's Wayne Epple and was links to Stenek and Paul Gabby and those guys, and they were we're going to bring this in. And they're already doing it in Bermuda, so Gosling's and the Royal Bermuda Yacht Club. Oh my God, I've forgotten the name of the other hotel. But yeah, there's a case study of in the Caribbean, people using eco spirits, And it just makes so much sense because you're paying for weight on a cargo ship or a plane for all of your stuff to come in. Take the weight of the bottles away. Okay, so carbon footprint, great. But one thing about waste is financially wasted. You know, like if you're buying stuff and throwing it away, that is financially bad for your business. If you really look at it, you want to like hit people where it hurts. Like shrink waste, and you shrink your costs a lot of the time. So, Eco Spirits here, we do 15,000 margaritas a year out of Cocoloba or something like that, and we switched over to Los Arcos, and it's 150 grams of carbon dioxide reduced per cocktail. Every eco-tote pulls a kilo of plastic out of, a kilo of waste out of the ocean. We're about like 3.5 tons of waste that has been pulled from the ocean. There's a lot of stuff in the waste in the ocean. It is literally a drop in the ocean, but it's something, and it's helping, and it's an evolving thing. But it's just this, the bags of bottles being somewhere. It's like a Mexican restaurant on a beach, and you sell a lot of margaritas. That the amount of bottles and glass that's going in, everyone's like, yeah, but it's recyclable. It's like, yeah, but it's recyclable with a massive amount of energy. Like glass is not like aluminium or aluminum, where it's like infinitely recyclable at a relatively low heat yield or energy yield. Glass takes a lot on that. So for me, the most impactful thing that I've seen on the island is that, and then with the new cocktail bars, them shifting themselves towards, rather than importing, I don't know, Longans or like, you know, some acai or whatever the cool thing is that everyone's doing. I was going to say pandan, but pandan actually grows here. Whatever the cool thing is for everyone around the world, and being like, hey, Nico De Soto is making pandan drinks again. We should do this, you know. They actually went out and just met with farmers and just went, so what have we got here? And they're like, well, we've got Cuban oregano or blue vervan, swamp verbena, and all of, here's the things that you can have from here. And they went and explored just what have we got here before they went, and the drinks is just as creative, if not more creative, than a lot of the places that can have everything. So yeah, those are the kind of highlights, I would say.
Nice, interesting.
Yeah.
So you've come a long way in your career. Any advice for a young bartender today? I mean, the landscape's very different. I talk about like, you can't follow my path. My path doesn't exist anymore. But what is your advice for a young bartender today?
Well, I think that there are some basic things that stood me in good stead. I told you the story about the gin and tonic. You know, I tell that a lot of the time, and giving people to read. I would never give people Cosmopolitan, A Bartender's Life, to read straight away, because there's loads of stuff in there about, like, you know, how to treat a douchey guest, or like, you know, and it's relevant when you've got a little bit of expertise in dealing with that situation 1,000 times. It's more like you feel seen. And a lot of memes today give people that feeling of community without having done necessarily the 1,000-time repetition, the practice that doesn't make perfect. Perfect isn't a thing. Perfect means you can stop and you don't have to try anymore. And there's never a point, you know, that you're going to know everything. But you know, don't run before you can walk. Know that you'll never learn everything, and also that person who thinks you're really good at something, you really should try and get judged by a jury of your peers. You know, like you know, Stephen Hawking. The level that he was working at, very few people could have that conversation with him. And maybe there was someone who was better at it than him, but only those people would know who was better at what within that world. Because to everyone else, you just look like the most intelligent or the, you know, smartest or the most innovative person in the room. So when someone walks in and you've done this and you talk about your, you know, wrote about distillate or this thing that you've just learned or whatever, this factoid about why they shouldn't drink this tequila or drink that one or whatever, and they're like, wow, you're really smart, you're a really great bartender, you're the best bartender I've ever seen. Don't listen to them. They don't know that just you always should be evolving, and that for me, if you start your career kind of at that thing with that open-mindedness of, I will never ever be the best bartender, but I'm going to try to be the best bartender that I can be. or floor person or person in hospitality or whatever it is you want to do, sustainable juice company person who works in like a different thing, whatever it is that you set out to do it, try and do it to the best of your abilities, but always be learning and always be ready to listen. And I think those are the things where it is a different playing field now. I learn more from the team that look up to me for putting in place training programs. I'm like, okay, cool guys, we're gonna do like 101s, and we're gonna do some movement techniques, and I'll give you some benefits of my experience. But also let's find out what your experience is and what you're reading about and everything, and pull that in. So yeah.
Brilliant. Yeah, I think the constantly learning thing is something I learned really early on, because coming from Toronto, I didn't have the Dick Bradsell at, the bar down the street. I didn't have the Dale DeGroff at a bar uptown. It was a pile of us that would just get together at cocktail competitions against each other and see. You could almost see where, looking back, you can see what everyone was reading, what old cocktail book they were reading based on what new technique they were using at that point. For a while, I think I was known as the vinegar bartender because I got super into guest streaks. But I noticed it in people now where it's like there's those that have hit like a plateau where they think they know everything. And it was like maybe they listened to that person that said you're a genius. Maybe they got written up in some newspaper, some magazine, and they plateau. And the best of them realize at some point and maybe dip and then go back up, and they're on that journey forever. But I realized early on I was at Havana Club Grand Prix as one of the two Canadian bartenders. There's one from English-speaking Canada, one from Montreal. And Philip Duff was the MC. And we only got like 1 hour to ourselves on like one day. And I just went to the rooftop of the hotel in downtown Havana and just like sat by the pool and was going to read. And Philip Duff happened to be the seat right beside me. And he was reading the book on like the history of Madeira or something like that. And it was just like, to me, this guy knows everything. And in that moment, I was like, he doesn't know everything. He's researching, like, this was 15, 16 years ago. It's like, Madeira is still esoteric now. And he's researching it then. I was like, amazing. Okay, so I'm never going to know everything because this guy, I'm never going to know what this guy knows, let alone everything. And he's still researching.
You've done this as like as a brand ambassador. I when I was with Santa Teresa, I'd been with them. I learned everything that they gave me. They were a little bit cagey initially about some of the questions I was asking, and it wasn't until I went to Venezuela, hung out with Nestor Ortega, who was the then master blender, but also the master distiller. From the guy's got like umpteen degrees and decades of experience running a chemical separation plant as well as the blending side of it. Didn't speak great English and my Spanish is terrible. So like I went there and he was passing on pieces of information to me. I was like, how am I ever going to stand in front of someone? Like you do this when you go and, like Mickey Heads from Ardbeg, or there's just a whole bunch of like amazing distillers and blenders around the world who've spent their careers and their lives becoming the best at this for a different thing. You go there and you're like, okay, so I'm going to go and stand in front of a room of people and pass on the little bit. So they're going to want all the information that you have, and I'm going to be this like little joining point between it. But even if I dedicated my life from right now, I would never be able to even get to a tenth of the level that any of these people who are specialists are. And yet you see bartenders all the time pontificate, oh yeah, don't drink that, that's bad. You're like, oh, interesting, because it's like, 200 years of history, and then they've got like a science lab, and then they've got these people who do this. Also, I really hate that kind of pejorative, because something's good or bad for something, or for someone. Yeah. And if you like something and it's good for you, and I don't like it and it's bad for me, we're both right.
Yeah.
It's our opinion. You don't need to change anyone. You need to do this. You don't shit on it. But yeah, I think that thing of like standing on the shoulders of giants only applies if you go and spend 20 years apprenticing and then 20 years learning how to be a master blender or something. Then you really, you haven't just read a book on Madeira.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, like PX sherry. If you were to take that from a Scotch world perspective, you'd be like, PX is the best sherry. That's all the sherry I want to drink. Go drink PX sherry. Go drink a 30-year-old PX Pedro Jimenez sherry. It is like spicy maple syrup. It's not some. I'll drizzle it over ice cream. I do not want to drink it by itself.
Yeah. Yeah.
But man, finish a Scotch with it. Awesome.
2 drops in something. It's like that aged balsamic vinegar thing.
Yeah.
When someone gives you your first taste of this. Or truffles. I'm just going to throw it out there. Truffles are amazing. But guys, we don't need truffles in absolutely everything. I feel like it's past
This
the
is
point.
Jim's opinion, not my own.
Yeah. There's a guy called Stu Hudson, and we went to a chateau where every day it was 14 bartenders, and we're in the south of France, and every day we got like €100 thing of truffles that came in from the truffle hunters in Limoges. So this is a pretty bougie trip, right? It's a 14th century abbey. But there were truffle laybacks. You'd just be sitting reading a book by the fire, and someone would come along and be like, tilt your head back. And it was truffle that was getting sliced in there. Breakfast was foie gras, foie gras brioche French toast. You melt foie gras in a pan and then put brioche into it, and then put it with the local bacon, and then truffles on top, and then that was kind of the thing. But I feel like for these intents, it's very cool. Truffles are very good. They're very luxurious. They're wonderful. We love truffles. They just shouldn't be everywhere. Yeah.
Yeah, maybe.
All right, we can test it sometime by finding out what is the actual saturation point
Of where truffles. Is it how many laybacks is too many laybacks of truffles?
I know. I'm serious. We should do this so that we have we'll do it, and we'll have orange juice in the morning. We'll have eggs. We'll have everything, and we'll just put truffles with everything. I'm sure that we could do it so that every single thing that we have is good with truffles.
Yeah.
I'm sure we could.
I had a cocktail that I was very upset that I didn't come up with, because I was trying to come up with a Hennessy XO and truffle cocktail, because XO wanted other, rare, pricey ingredients in it, and then I couldn't make it work because it just required, like, truffle really needs fat to really, get the flavor across properly, and if you infuse it, and it's like XO just overpowers the truffle in the infusion if you have no fat. And so, like, there's a lot of different nuances that just, it wasn't working out. It wasn't working out to the point where you're like, that's amazing. You're like, yeah, do I get XO and truffle? Cool. Is it amazing? Not yet. And then I went to Monarch, a bar in Dallas that is owned or operated by the Maple and Ash Group, that's got one in Chicago and one in Phoenix now, and they just poured XO over a large cube and then took like a pinky fingernail size piece of white truffle and just shaved it on top of the cube, so it wasn't under the water level or under the cognac level. So when you picked up the glass, you got all your olfactory just was white truffle, a little bit of XO in the background. You sipped, and you still had the olfactory of that white truffle, and it stayed on top of the cube, and it was just like goddamn genius. And that was a cocktail.
Yeah.
2 ingredients, big ice cube, done.
Oh, like the complexity of truffle is amazing, but you put that stuff into alcohol, and this is like, back in the day where people were doing tobacco extractions, and that's okay. Kids, if you don't know that, don't put tobacco into alcohol or quinine or many other, complex chemicals get bad when they get pulled into alcohol, because alcohol is really good at that. That's why we use it for those things. So, it's great that people understand hydrosols, and like we say, that we can write about things and stuff. But sometimes just a little bit of the main ingredient, I'm going to use that as the excuse so I didn't put the mint distillate in here, but that was because I knew that just one little leaf slapped on top, and
Would do it.
No.
Yeah.
Still blagging it, but it doesn't always have to be the whole kitchen sink and everything.
What? So if I'm coming for one weekend, never been to Cayman before, where are you sending me? What should I be doing?
So yeah, no, I'm kind of paid to say Kimpton Seafire Resort and Spa.
Oh, I would say it as well. It's
Yeah.
great. Great restaurant. Ate there last night.
Oh, because you did have it, yeah.
Yeah, and then I mean we're in the library bar. The library bar is excellent bar for cocktails. Beautiful scenery. Yeah.
I should probably plug. So, Library by the Sea is a library by the sea. It's a bar in the lobby of a hotel that's called the Library. That's not original. Neither is a vintage spirit selection. Neither is a book. A menu based around books and literature. Neither is having like an amazing bar team and stuff like that. Put all of those things together. It's probably the only one that does it. But it's really bright. You can see kind of like this is the uniqueness of its location and stuff, and it's pretty creative. Like I think, but also you can just read a book here, and we have Kindles and stuff. So definitely, at some point, get sandy toes, and then come in and sit and have a beer or a coffee. It doesn't matter what you want to do. Read a book. We have a table just behind Jordan over there that seats one person, like very specifically, so you can sit and read a book because that's my luxury room. But no, like aside, so for fooding and drinking, next door in Agua, so restaurant and bar next to each other. Next door is like a speakeasy vibe that you could pick it up and put it anywhere in the world, and everyone would just be like, this bar fits in Asia, in Australasia, or in New York or London or San Francisco or any of the other cities that I'm not mentioning. Don't call me out. And then door number 4 is super creative. They're working. They're like pretty laid back guys. But they are using every technique that everyone is using. So there are milk punches and clarifications and sodas and highballs and stuff on the menu. They're pitch perfect. Like how you go in and someone's ticking all the boxes, but the drinks are a little bit sweet or off. Never going to happen at door number 4. Their drinks are just awesome. So that's my like, I'm a cocktail drinker. Where do I go? Segment. Forget about that. The Cayman Islands is so much more than that. So there's the Discovery Channel. Like in those bars, the old style bars where they used to have the TV up and it shows like the people swimming with the coral and stuff like that. So you could just go and do that by walking into the sea anywhere on 7 Mile Beach. You go out like 100 feet and the water's super buoyant. It's also incredibly warm. It's like 70 degrees. And you just snorkel and you're basically living in the Discovery Channel. And if you free dive or if you scuba dive, this is some of the best of that in the world, right? You got to do some of it yesterday, right?
Saw an eagle ray, a turtle, multiple barracudas, lots of other fish that I can't name, lots of coral. Yeah, there was a lot going on.
There's 2 like segues. One of the we got a James Bond drink on the menu, except it's not. It's Ian Fleming because he lived in the Caribbean. He really loved the Caribbean. He lived in Jamaica, but he references, and Bond is always appearing in like the Bahamas or wherever, and then going snorkeling and scuba diving. But there is a Caymanian fisherman in 2 of his books, Dr. No and Live and Let Die, called Quarrel, and so we put that into one of our drinks. But one of the things about the flora and fauna here, so James Bond is named for the author of Birds of the West Indies. So he was looking for a really boring name to call his super spy, and he looked left and he had Birds of the West Indies, and there was James Bond. And the second one is there's this amazing set of book called the Reef Classification series, and it works like anywhere in the Caribbean. But my wife, when she goes out snorkeling, she'll come back. First thing she'll do is just go in and then so I saw 2 of these parrotfish, one of those clownfish, like, barracuda, needlefish, like eagle ray, this type of turtle, whatever. And that's just like there all the time. It's not, I have to pay someone to go and do something with specialist equipment. It is, I have a snorkel and I go into the sea. That's really big. I think it's very important that I mentioned Macabuca, who have supported me all of these years. This is a dive bar, not in like, it's literally, you just go there and it's a bar with an amazing restaurant, and they have like fresh catch and all of this sort of stuff, and beautiful cocktails and drinks and stuff. It's outside, it's beautiful. But then there's a ladder, and you go, and you are just off of the Cayman Wall, which is the second deepest place in the ocean after the Marianas Trench. So you can scuba dive there, but you can just go and snorkel there, and then you can come back and have like
lionfish taco or something like that. So those are a couple of my like personal highlights. But yeah, Botanical Gardens is amazing. The crystal caves, super interesting, especially the bats. If you don't like bats, you may either overcome that by going down there and seeing them in their natural environment, or just don't go and do it. But yeah, it's amazing. And then yeah, the island drive. You guys did a little bit of an island drive,
Yep.
right? So you made it down to Eden Rock.
Yeah, Eden Rock is where I did a lot of my free diving. I tried to do it at Macabuca, but it's off season. It's like end of hurricane season, so big swells. They said, yeah, don't go. They had a little rope across the little ladder you were speaking about. So decided, okay, I'll listen to you. You live here. You might know a thing or two more than me. So yeah.
Yeah, I think we have Cemetery Beach, which I have totally sloughed off like the negative connotations of that one. But I said that to someone, they were like, "That's macabre," and I was like, I suppose, but it's this beautiful cemetery, like it's like all white marble, and then you walk through it, and on the other side of it, like it's like the beach is just there, but it's just one best kept secret, by the way. Don't tell anyone. It's this beautiful like beach. There's a little bit of shade from the trees out there. There's a couple of picnic tables, but that is some of the best reef heads that coral reef heads that you'll find without going out to like Stingray City, and then Starfish Point. Or if you go out to the coral heads there, they're a little bit deeper, so you can go up. But yeah, it's awesome, and it's super safe. Though, sorry, I forget to mention this though. Coming from having lived internationally and primarily in like larger and larger cities, but having traveled, you learn when you're traveling to like watch your stuff. Don't put your wallet and phone in your back pocket. There's just like these things, and a lot of that just kind of doesn't apply here. Like taxis might be expensive, but it's a tiny island with like 3 roads. But you go snorkeling and your stuff's safe, like by yourself. And I think that's it's not just unique. Like, I'm not saying anything about anywhere else in the Caribbean. It's not just unique for an island in the Caribbean. That's a really unique thing to be in the world.
Yep.
I'm like such a rube now when I go anywhere. I'm like walking around and like la la la, and someone's like, "Dude, your bag's open at the back and you've got your camera hanging out." I'm like, "Oh yeah, people might want to take stuff from me. That's bad." It is, and you feel that. I think you can tell me you just got here. You get that vibe when you kind of come out of the airport, right?
Yeah. You don't. I don't know. You don't worry anymore. It's interesting here. It's not. I was talking to somebody. It's not that there's no crime. It's just that the only crime is like some really petty stuff, and it's somebody described it as your bike might get stolen if you leave it unlocked for 1 year in the same spot.
Yeah, you got to watch out for those pesky bike thieves who take. Yeah. I mean, like, I didn't lock my car for like the first 3 months that I was here. And then one day someone took the $1.50 change that was in, like, where you put your change, the old ashtray or whatever. But they didn't take my sunglasses that were in the thing or any of the other stuff that was in there, or like my battery charger device or any of this stuff, and I was just like, wow, coming from it. So it is, it's specially managed. I think it's also worth mentioning. We talked a lot about the cocktail scene. That's kind of my world, but the culinary scene was built way before that and probably allowed for that to come. It's not just about like money. Anthony Bourdain and Eric Ripper used to come here, and then they would get their buddies to come and have a bit of a jolly, but cook while they did it, and that's like the Cayman cookout thing. Which is, now it's massive, like people fly here on private jets, and then they do like wine tastings on private jets to Jamaica for lunch and all of this stuff. And there's some pretty bougie stuff that's part of it. But there's also just like everyone, but it means that there's a really good culinary scene here, not just based around the fact that people have a high disposable income. So like I say, go to Macabuca, get like a, lionfish burger or whatever. Come to Ave, like you had the food there yesterday. There's some really good food on the island too.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. All right, Jim, thanks very much.
Right.
Cheers to you.
Thank you so much for coming, and thanks for the Between the Sheets.
Thank you. I'm going to be back to Cayman as much as possible. This place is pretty great.